So obviously, after the election of Donald Trump, the Democrats had to do some soul searching, and they asked themselves, how could Donald Trump win? How could this guy win? Could it have been a terrible campaign that didn't focus on bettering people's material conditions? Could it have been our unequivocal support for Israel, which is super unpopular with various different groups? Or was it all because of Joe Rogan? Was it all because Donald Trump did a Joe Rogan interview? Is it all because, Joe Rogan endorsed Donald Trump and young men? I made a video on that last week. Gen Z have swung massively since 2018 for Republican politicians across the spectrum. So that must be the answer. And the answer actually is we need a liberal or we need a leftist Joe Rogan to actually win elections. And obviously, this has been memed a lot and people saying how silly it is. And I just want to give my take about it as someone who makes very left-wing content on YouTube. Obviously a bit different to Joe Rogan. I'm not a podcaster. Because I think this completely misses the point when it comes to election wins and stuff, right? Because if we want to talk about, we want, young men to have better social values. We want them to be more progressive on transgender rights. We want them to be more progressive on women's rights. I hear all that when it comes to a podcast like Joe Rogan being so popular. When we're talking about actual elections, though, I really don't see the answer to, let's say, liberals winning elections or even leftists winning elections having someone like Joe Rogan. Yeah, sure. Does it help to have the media on your side and alt media on your side? Yeah, of course it does. And does it help normalize political candidates, like literally people saying they voted for Trump because they saw him on their favorite podcast, which is Joe Rogan? Yeah, it's important to a certain extent. Is what you campaign on way, way more important? And if you're sidelining that to focus on Joe Rogan, are you an idiot? Yeah. Yeah, of course. So as a white straight man who fits into the demographic, not American obviously, but that swung for the Republicans, 18 to 29, 29 in 1 week. I used to listen to Joe Rogan in 2015, 2016. Used to listen to him a lot. And I was totally aware that he would sometimes agree with left-wing politics. So there's a video that's been going around of Joe Rogan agreeing with left-wing principles in theory, like universal healthcare, for example, saying he likes Bernie Sanders and taxing the rich, and he doesn't like Donald Trump and everything like that. And yeah, Joe Rogan did used to entertain more left-wing ideas on his podcast. And I think people are getting the wrong message. Just because Joe Rogan might have entertained some left-wing ideas doesn't mean the podcast used to be left-wing at all. So the Joe Rogan podcast, and kind of still is, I guess, I don't listen to it anymore, it was never about politics. He'd have political people on. He had Gary Johnson on back in the day when he was running for president. He's had lots of politicians on over the years. But primarily, he just has loads of random guests on. And the reason people like Joe Rogan is pretty much not even because of him a lot of the times. It's because of the people he gets on and the kind of how much he cultivates a certain, I guess, type of person. Usually someone into pseudoscience or philosophy or MMA. Also comedians, also actors. The last Joe Rogan podcast I actually listened to out of wanting to listen to it was the one he did with Oliver Stone and the one he did with Edward Norton. And that was in 2020. And why I would listen to that is because Joe Rogan used to be a famous actor, is an alleged comedian as well, and has a big podcast. Loads of famous people go on it, and you get to hear them talk in this environment, which is more relaxed, about a variety of things that you probably wouldn't get to hear them talk about in any other setting. And it also, Joe Rogan podcast was popular before a lot of them. It was one of the places you could get these talented people to talk at length about random stuff. And just because Joe Rogan had left-wing people on doesn't mean this podcast ever turned people to left-wing politics. And also, Joe Rogan is just a bit of an idiot, right? He would just agree with anything people said. He had Cornel West on once and agreed with so much of what he said. Joe Rogan does not believe in the same things as Cornel West. He does not believe in the same things as Bernie Sanders. And Joe Rogan's podcast always skewed conservative. Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, just every single right-wing person has been a regular on the Joe Rogan podcast, far more than any progressive people. I have a Carl Kalinske tweet up here. He used to go on Joe Rogan sometimes. I've seen Cenk on Joe Rogan. I've seen a couple people. but you never get like loads of socialists and communists on it. Bernie Sanders is probably like the most left-wing person who has been on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I don't think Joe Rogan is as influential as people think. And also a lot of people who now watch Joe Rogan are actually going to him because of his conservative audience and conservative guests, while a lot of people who used to watch him have left. So he is attracting conservatives to watch his podcast more than he's turning an established audience into conservative. And also let's remember, it's just one demographic, which also a lot of them in this demographic don't even vote in the first place. So blaming Gen Z men for Trump winning is just stupid. It just doesn't work out like that. And I know not all of his audience are Gen Z men, but they're saying that Joe Rogan is like a symptom of this. Gen Z men, millennial men, Gen X men, they all listen to Joe Rogan, and that's where they'll hear conservative politics. Now, I do agree there is a problem more broadly with the conservatives having domination in the media ecosystems. And I would say in the UK it's a bit different, where we have centrists dominating them. You know, they are pretty much conservatives, but they aren't as far right. Where in the US it's more like just the far right dominate all these things. And that is important. Like, how much does Fox News play a role in helping various Republicans get elected, including George Bush stealing the 2000 election? Yeah, of course, that is important. But I want to point something out as well, because I focus on the social element. Like, let's say you listen to Joe Rogan, you agree with him politically on social things, trans people in sports, I don't know, all the other bullshit he peddles. There's something you need to remember, is that people mostly vote for their material conditions. And this is something that always stuck out with me, because it's absolutely fucking insane, but I think it proves everything, right? So there's been a narrative around the election that Latino men don't vote for women because they're misogynistic. Firstly, that's just a huge stereotype, which isn't really true, considering Latinos and Latino men voted for Clinton more than they voted for Republicans. And also, when they're talking about Mexican men, yeah, the two candidates for the Mexican leadership this year, or the presidency, were both women. So this is a culture that has a problem with women. But there was this article that came out in the 2008 presidential election. I couldn't find the original one now, but it's The Guardian reporting on the article, called Racist for Obama. And I just wanted to read it for you quickly, to just show you how people, even when they're bigoted, and even when they might be watching Fox News all the time to rot their brain, people fundamentally care about material conditions more. This is an extreme example, but I wanted to read it because it's extreme. So Sean Quinn of the site 538 has been driving around the Middle Atlantic. Yesterday, he was in a town called Washington, Pennsylvania, about 40 miles north of M-Town. I know this turf quite well. Obviously, we called Washington Little Washington to distinguish it from Washington, D.C., which was close enough to be a familiar destination. Anyway, Sean heard the following story in this town where Obama just got slaughtered by Hillary Clinton. A canvasser goes to a woman's door in Washington, Pennsylvania, knocks. Woman answers, knocker asks who she's planning to vote for. She isn't sure, has to ask her husband who she's voting for. Husband is off in another room watching some game. Canvasser hears him yell back, "We're voting for the racial slur," meaning Obama. The woman turns back and says, as a matter of fact, that we're voting for the racial slur. I've heard similar stories from West Virginia in which people openly use the N-word while saying they're voting for Obama. It's important not to read too much into this. It's mostly a reflection of the economy, McCain's ridiculous response to the crisis, Palin's presence, and clearly part of it must be Obama has come across to these folks as smart and steady and someone who will use good judgment in office. I still doubt that Obama will carry West Virginia, but he's a lot further along with these voters than I'd thought back in April or May. So Obama did lose West Virginia in 2008, but I'm highlighting that because fundamentally the conversation about a left-wing Joe Rogan or a liberal Joe Rogan to help the Democrats win another election just completely misses the point, right? It's all about economic issues during an election. And rather than focusing on making some sort of liberal media empire and going to meet the youth and Gen Z, promising people things economically that will impact them the most is the way to go. And with America, right, their social safety nets, their healthcare system, they're so bad. There are so many things you could do and campaign big on to win an election. So Obama, of course, campaigned on a lot of things, which made him a good candidate, and he campaigned on vibes, and he campaigned on policy. That's how you get people who are actually racist, like insanely racist, voting for Obama because they thought he'd be good on economic issues and stuff like that, right? So in that, if someone like Kamala Harris or just any Democrat campaigned on literally like, I'm going to give you universal healthcare, it's time. The UK has had it for like 70 something years. Most of the developed world have it. We have to have it too. Too many people die every year from not having healthcare. We need to modernize and stuff. Or I need to do something economic, right? Some big economic policy to help people's everyday lives instead of the Democrats pretending, oh, because inflation's not as bad anymore, people love us for the economy. They don't, because everyone's like gas is going up, everyone's bills are going up, everyone's rent is going up, and you're not doing anything about it. So they're not going to vote for you, they're just going to blame you. And if they don't think you can handle these economic things, then they're not going to vote for you. And that's the fundamental point. The conversation completely misses for me. The Democrats and just any like liberal left political organization, they don't need a Joe Rogan to target young men. And I would say focusing on loads of people who don't vote is also important, including young people. But elections are lost on policy, not on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I'd be super surprised if most people who listen to Joe Rogan actually even vote at all, because it's not a political podcast. It's a stupid podcast. It's got more right wing over time. I don't think people primarily listen to Joe Rogan for politics. I'm more of a political figure, I'll grant you that, mainly for him talking about anti-vaccine shit. At the same time, I don't think leftists should even look to emulate him because they're missing another reason which I outlined at the start. Joe Rogan's podcast did not start off as a political podcast. It works well and it's always worked well because he's so well connected and he gets loads of interesting guests on, so people listen to it. And because he's been doing it for so long, it would be really hard to ever replicate that sort of popularity. If we want to have a broader conversation about making more, I guess, like male influencers have more progressive values and putting that out there, and also another part of this, when you have like podcasts that are reinforcing gender norms and certain like masculine values, it's hard for the left to compete with that because we don't actually believe in that. Like you can show like healthy masculinity in a Western setting or whatever, but we're not going to go like transphobic. We're not going to push all this toxic stuff because fundamentally we realize what gender is. It is a construct. So we're not going to start reinforcing all this stuff about what it means to be a man. And that's not going to be what people want to hear either. So you have to accept in some ways that when there's podcasts, conservative podcasts telling people what they want to hear, easy things they want to hear, it's going to be hard to compete with that. Not least because, you know, Joe Rogan signed a $200 million deal with Spotify and is heavily pushed by them, and is a very rich man himself who's friends with rich people, so he's already in bed with that elite. Left-wing people are fundamentally against that stuff, so again, it's harder to become that popular. I think left-wing media has had a good surge recently. I think it's still growing. It's going to take a long time. YouTube channels, everything like that. At the same time, if the Labour Party want to stop the far-right rising in the UK, if the Democrats want to win again, there's an easier solution than trying to make clones of Joe Rogan for the left. It's promise economic prosperity, promise improving people's material conditions, and actually do it. They like to complicate politics so much. The Labour Party are absolutely useless, the Democrats are absolutely useless, and they will always deflect to stuff like this. So yeah, Democrats, if you want to win elections, promise things like universal healthcare and things that actually help people who are getting desperate, and people will vote for you, even if they might not agree with you on cultural things, as people often vote for their economic interests above all else.